भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ आप्यायन्तु ममाङ्गानि वाक्प्राणश्चक्षुश्रोत्रमथो बलमिन्द्रियाणि च सर्वाणि। सर्वं ब्रह्म उपनिषदं माहं ब्रह्म निराकुर्यां मा ब्रह्म निराकरोद। निराकरणमस्त्वनिराकरणं मेस्तु तदात्मनि निरतेय उपनिषत्सु धर्मास्ते मयि सन्तु ते मयि सन्तु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
We'll chant part 4 of Kenopanishad.
सा ब्रह्मेति होवाच ब्रह्मणो वा एतद्विजये महीयध्वमिति ततो हैव विदाञ्चकार ब्रह्मेति। तस्माद्वा एते देवा अतितरामिवान्यान् देवान् यदग्निर्वायुरिन्द्रस्ते येन नेदिष्ठं पस्पर्शुस्ते येन प्रथमो विदाञ्चकार ब्रह्मेति। तस्माद्वा इन्द्रोऽतितरामिवान्यान् देवान् स येन नेदिष्ठं पस्पर्श स येन प्रथमो विदाञ्चकार ब्रह्मेति। तस्यैष आदेशो यदेतद्विद्युतो व्यद्युतदा इति न्यमीमिषदा इत्यधिदैवतम्। अथाध्यात्मं यदेतद्गच्छतीव च मनोनेन चैतदुपस्मरत्यभीक्ष्णगो सङ्कल्पः। तद्धतद्वनं नाम तद्वनमित्युपासितव्यं स य एतदेवं वेदाभिहैनगो सर्वाणि भूतानि संवाञ्छन्ति। उपनिषदम्भो ब्रूहीत्युक्तात उपनिषद् ब्राह्मीं वावत उपनिषदमब्रूमेति। तस्यैतपोदमः कर्मेति प्रतिष्ठा वेदाः सर्वाङ्गानि सत्यमायतनम्। यो वा एतामेवं वेदापहत्य पाप्मानमनन्ते स्वर्गे लोके जेये प्रतितिष्ठति प्रतितिष्ठति।
So in the 7th mantra, the disciple asks for confirmation of the completion of the Upanishad, and he is also yearning for the extra bit of knowledge which is traditionally there for seekers, a lingering thought about learning a little more. The extreme objectivity of the master is revealed in that mantra, where he very patiently says that what has been given by us in this sermon is the Upanishad itself. The Upanishad of Brahman has been indeed imparted to you. So, virtually, that mantra marks the completion of Kenopanishad. But out of extreme compassion to the student, since he has asked for probably some extra tips, the master concludes the Upanishad after 2 mantras. So mantras 8 and 9 are given as a extra addition, where all the sadhanas are given in a nutshell or in a capsule. So the mantra 8, which we took in the last class, says tapaha, austerity, dama, restraint, and karma, action, are its foundation. Vedas are its limbs. Satyam is its abode. When we say its abode, it is not Brahman is different from the abode. When Adi Shankaracharya interprets in various places what Vaikuntha is said to be the abode of Vishnu. But Vaikuntha and Vishnu as two different entities are not there. From the highest standpoint, it is only Brahman. So, Satyam is the ultimate place, ultimate state of Brahman itself. So, this Satyam is that which is Sat, which is there in all three periods of time, which does not change. That is where it rests. Therefore, it is the abode. But we said in the practical way, practicing Satyam leads to the ultimate Satyam. And what is practicing Satyam? Satyam is actually truth, speaking truth. See, there are some sadhanas in Hinduism which are superficially understood and it probably loses its deep significance or meaning. One such practice is Brahmacharya. Brahmacharya is translated in many places as celibacy or abstinence from sex. No doubt it is an aspect of it, but the word Brahmacharya itself indicates that a person is walking in the path of Brahman. Therefore, what helps him to walk in the path of Brahman is absolute control over his senses. That is what Brahmacharya essentially means. Essentially, Brahmacharya is a mastery over senses, a state where desire is not induced. Krishna was called as a brahmachari, Nitya Brahmachari. Nitya Brahmachari means a perpetual celibate who had many wives, was countless wives. So how can Brahmacharya mean only at the physical level of not having physical contact? That cannot be the in-depth meaning. It is a superficial meaning. So whether you have the control over the senses or the senses are having control over you, this is what we need to establish in what is known as a Brahmacharya stage. That is why the first stage of a man's life is called Brahmacharya, because in that stage where 15 to 17 years or whatever time he is spending to master the knowledge, he is not supposed to let loose his energy in a wasteful way through addiction to senses. Therefore, that stage is called as Brahmacharya stage. There is a sort of a story or an episode that is given that in the Gurukula, it is said that they take bhiksha and give it to the wife of the Guru, she's Guru Mata, and then she serves the food. After she serves the food, she gives ghee and then they say the prayer and they eat. So one day a boy tastes that and he says, no, this is not ghee, this is neem oil or something. So that is the time Guru says your time in the ashram is over. Because all this while, neem oil was only given. You had no focus on the taste because you are concentrating on the studies. Now it is time for you to get into Grahastha Ashrama. He very nicely says, now your studies are over. You have to get into the Grahastha Ashrama stage. So Brahmacharya stage is where the senses are controlled and the energies are focused towards learning knowledge. That is real Brahmacharya. Ahimsa. Brahmacharya, like a physical discipline, ahimsa is a mental discipline. Ahimsa is not wanting to hurt others. A mental attitude of not hurting even the last perceptible organism that you see. So many people think ahimsa as just non-killing. That need not be ahimsa in a context. See, there are some religious masters and followers who close their mouth with some nice cloth so that they don't even hurt germs, which is a very fine gesture. So to that extent, if awareness is there, very nice. But it does not end with just non-killing. See, they may even hurt others by their words. They can kill others by various other acts. It could be that unreasonable, interest, or they may extract out of, if they are a money lender, let us say, that is also hurting actually. So, ahimsa is being non-injurious at the mental, that is the attitude. Ironically, all the Hindu gods and goddesses, including Lord Ganesha, they are given some weapon to show that they are ready to kill, ready to destroy wherever injustice is tending to take over. You see Vishnu, you see Shiva, or anybody, Indra, everybody carries a weapon. Shakti, she carries a weapon. So it is not really non-killing, it is non-injurious attitude. Sometimes, of course, not as a rule, sometimes you have to use violence to establish non-violence. Everybody quotes this Vedic mantra that ahimsa paramo dharma, which is correct, but the next line says dharma himsas tataivacha. In order to establish dharma, if himsa has to be used, that is also equally paramo dharma. Ahimsa is paramo dharma. That there is no doubt about it. So, there is a theory that the Muhammadan conquest was averted many times, but after many times, Ghazni's army had cows in front of the army, and the Hindus who revered cows, which is correct and must be done, but not at the cost of losing the nation. And it is not that they are protectors of cows. They might have even killed the cows for the dinner that day, but they were not attacked because cows were in the front. This is not ahimsa. If required to protect for a higher cause the motherland, you need to kill few cows. That has to be done. This is ahimsa. If a child is bitten by a mad dog, if injection has to be given, maybe some violence has to be used because the child will not cooperate at that point of time. That is ahimsa only, because you are having a kindness towards the child that it should be all right. Like brahmacharya and ahimsa, another concept is satyam. Satyam is being honest at the intellectual level. Intellectual honesty is satyam. Speaking truth is satyam. Again, it is one aspect of it or a surface meaning of it, which is essential. But what is more important is to establish what is truth at the intellectual level, for which sometimes, rarely, if you need to utter which is not a fact at that point of time, in that context, it is permissible, it is admissible. This is what we discussed in the last class. So, Satyam is being truthful to yourself. Being truthful to yourself is defined nicely by Shakespeare as, to thine own self be true, it must follow as night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. Being true to oneself is following your intellectual conviction and conscience at all points of time. Conviction is what you arrive at an intellectual conclusion after deliberation. Having fixed that as an ideal or a value, you follow it at any cost. You have decided to be a vegetarian, or you want to get up early in the morning and study Vedanta. Whatever you have fixed for yourself, do not deviate from it at any cost. That is leading a life of truth. Because a friend tempted, or because of some lazy excuse, we cannot deviate away from this. Now, if there is confusion in following what you have kept as conviction, then be calm at that point of time. Whatever your inner conscience is the voice of God, as it were, functioning and clearly audible in a sattvic person. That voice, which will not probably alarm you if you are on the right path, but which will immediately come out if you are deviating away from the right path, is the voice of conscience. Antaratma, they say. Follow that. If you are following the conviction and conscience, you are being true to yourself. If you are true to yourself, you cannot be false to any person. Most of us, most of the time, try to be true to many persons and end up being not truthful to ourselves. And it is not possible to please everybody simultaneously. And it is not the correct method also. You have to be truthful to yourself. Ultimately, everybody will fall in your line. So just walk on the path of truth without bothering about anybody. This is what is symbolized by Yudhishthira's ascension to heaven. Lastly, after giving up the kingdom in favor of Parikshit, 5 brothers and Draupadi, they are walking towards the heaven in the Himalayas. They are going upwards. One by one, the brothers fall. First, Sahadeva falls, and each person, as he is falling, they think that Dharma is there to rescue him. But Dharma says, come on, take a couple of steps and come with me, I can take you. They are not able to. And he has to leave them like that and then move forward. And each of them is given a reason as to why they are falling. Draupadi is falling. All the 4 brothers, Draupadi, have fallen. Only Dharma is walking. And a dog which was faithful to them, that is also walking behind him. And finally, the gates of the heaven open and asks Yudhishthira to enter. And then they prevent the entry of the dog. They say dogs don't have permission to enter here. So Dharma says, more than my brothers and my wife, it is this dog which has followed me till the very end. If this dog has no place, then I am not ready to enter. That was his conviction. And then the God said, you have passed the final test also. That dog was nothing but Dharma itself. It was a personification of Dharma itself. So that is how you have to walk in the path of truth, says Swami Ramatirtha. Doesn't matter what happens, anything around you, you stick to the conviction and conscience and move forward. That is truth. Your thought, word and deed are in one line. That is conservation. That is truth. So truth is being straightforward. Now, that conservation of energy is indicated by another discipline here called tapas. Tapaha. Tapaha means austerity. Tapaha literally means heating, hot. That means literally body is heated through certain sadhana so that the thought focus is on the higher. See, though we say it is the mind that really matters as long as it is focused on the self, rarely we will find sadhakas, particularly at our levels, to focus on the higher if the body is always in the comfort zone of luxuries. It is just not possible. You can try, but so therefore our forefathers and rishis saw this, and then they kept certain strict disciplines so that your thought is automatically focused towards the higher. So at least to remind that, they said once in a month, once in a year, in the month of December, January, which is a cold month, you take bath in cold water. Those who are devotees of Ayyappa, they go there in that month, after that month of Vrata. Some people in Shravan month, they walk and go to Devgar and other temples. Or it could be some other day of the week that they keep fasting, or they do certain practices. These practices should not be viewed isolated just as a physical thing. It must be taken as an exercise to conserve the energy which will otherwise dissipate in unproductive channels and take it towards the higher. That is what is symbolized in the Devas doing tapas or Asuras doing tapas. You see them standing on one leg or hanging upside down. Such Gora practices are given imagine if a body has to be put through that, and how much you have to focus on the self to remain in that position. That is called as tapas. 21st of June, Yoga Day is coming. Hatha Yoga is one aspect of this. No doubt we understand it's the mind that controls the body. But if we do certain practices as Hatha Yoga at the body level, it prepares the ground conducive for mind control, breath control, etc. So you try to stand on that one leg, it is called as Vrikshasana. Seems to be an easy asana, but you have to see how much balance you require to stand in that asana. If you are able to stand, then take both the arms up like this and do that Namaste pose. It is even more difficult. If you are able to do that, try to close your eyes. It is not possible. Compared to some asanas which are very complicated in the hand and leg movement, this seems to be simple. And therefore they say in that Vrikshasana, focus on a point in front and try to concentrate on that point. So just stand and concentrate, that seems to be easier. But when you do Vrikshasana and that is the tapas. So like that, every aspect where your energies are focused to a particular point towards the higher, that is called as tapas. See, when it is a very glamorous life as we see from outside, a person goes through when he joins an Indian cricket team. But it is a great tapas there also. It is not easy to retain yourself without performance, and that performance involves not just what you score on the match, what you eat, what you exercise, how you keep. Nowadays, see if you see the old videos of cricket, in times of Bradman or even later, there used to be a very tight field set, and if Bradman hits a ball in the gap, it will go to the boundary. Fielders will clap. They don't run and chase the ball. That was the style of cricket at that point of time. Now 2 people chase the ball, sometimes 3 people. Relay throw, they fall for every inch is covered, and what that 1 run save could be the difference at the end of the day score, like that it is calculated. So if a person has to fall, his body goes through whatever, tennis, cricket, you see the amount of transformation that it has happened over the years. So therefore what they undergo in maintaining this is tapas, a discipline, a concerted effort. You cannot have parties and drinking all the time in between matches or in between every evening. It is not possible. At the end of the series, maybe if you have holidays, then you enjoy like that. A pageant show like a Miss World or a Miss Universe, that involves a great amount of preparation, maybe for a year or so. All that is tapas. So tapas is the foundation. These are the foundations. So you think about a tripod with 3 legs. One is tapas. The mind is withdrawn by these practices and directed towards the higher. Damaha. Damaha is restraint. In the Tattvabodha, we studied Shama and Damaha as sense control and mind control. It can be taken that way. Basically, it is a restraint of the senses. It is closely associated with tapas. Where the senses go and you try to pull it back, that is one way of practice. Where you are able to control the mind by certain thought process, that is included in Dhamma. So up to that state of meditation, various practices, manana and various other practices are given so that the mind is restrained. The main idea is that senses and mind have a tendency to pull themselves in different directions. So therefore, it is by themselves they are very powerful, like horses. In different directions it will go. So the charioteer holds the reins of the horses very powerfully. So that is the exercise of Dhamma. The intellect is acutely aware of what all the mind is doing, where all the mind is going, and tries to control it by not allowing it to just pass it like that. And then such a disciplined senses and the mind, that body is engaged in karma. Karma means action. If you see that in the whole Upanishad, only one place here karma is mentioned, which is the essential yoga for all of us at our stage. In Gita, it is explained in detail. In Vedanta treatise, you have chapter after chapter mentioning that. But here, one word karma, that's all. What type of karma is talking about?
Right.
Sorry?
Right.
What is the right karma? Nishkama karma. That is selfless activity, which is what he is recommending the students at the Upanishad level. So, if we are able to rise beyond desired actions, obviously Papa karma or forbidden actions are not discussed at all. It is not for discussion in Upanishads. If you are able to rise above desired actions, and if you are able to perform Nishkama karma is the selfless actions, desireless actions. That means no desire pertaining to the world prompts such actions. Only desire for self-realization. This type of karma we see naturally being performed by nature. Fruits are given by the trees, cows give milk, roses give fragrance. These are all actions. Do they really do it? They just express themselves. Sun does whatever it does. Earth does whatever it does, gives vegetation, which has no motive, no desire whatsoever. That is unconsciously done. But if you are able to consciously do it, how is it possible? It is not possible for a human being because there is ego. Ego really affects him. So at our level, can we not do Nishkama karma? It is possible. Sometimes when we do certain inspired actions, which are not based on any selfish or unselfish desire, but off the cuff we do something. It is very rare, but sometimes it is possible for us to inspiredly do something. When I say inspired, we do not belong to that state. It is just that, see, it could be that you are walking along the bridge and somebody is drowning, you immediately jump and save. There, the thought of saving this, that you have to jump and save, that is the only thing. Whether that will give you punya or whether that has to be saved, whether you can really save yourself. So actually, such type of inspired actions even goes to the level of even sacrificing your own life for something. That type of actions we can do once in a while if God wills by inspiration. But who can do really Nishkama karma is a person who is a true renunciate, who can really think of the self in all the actions and dedicate all the actions towards only self-realization. That is a Nishkama karma. He has no motive in achieving anything for himself, that is clear. Selfish actions is not there. He has no motive or desire to do something for others also. But invariably such actions will help others. That is different. Sun, whatever it does, cow, whatever it does, it helps the world. But there is no, let us say for a nightingale, there is no desire to please the villagers. There is no desire to please itself or to gain fame for itself. Why it sings? It sings because it's its nature to express itself by song. Similarly, if that person's nature is to express himself as what he is, that type of a karma which is done through a person, as it were, is this type of a Nishkama karma. One can go through the various stages of unselfish actions and then only he can do selfless actions. It is not possible for a person to suddenly get into the frequency of selfless actions. So as far as we are concerned, you do those actions which inspire you. Inspiration is where your mind feels like doing it and your mind is saturated with that idea and it is really inspiring to help others in any way. You can go ahead and do it. That type of action will fall under karma. So tapaha, damaha and karma are the foundations of the truth. It is through this foundation you climb. And what are the limbs in this? If you figure this, the foundation or the where which is standing is these three, and the limbs are the Vedas. Vedas, Swamiji has broadly interpreted this as the Vedas themselves, and all knowledges. All knowledge is also called as Vedas. Why all knowledges? Because every knowledge is nothing but the expression of that supreme knowledge of the self. Therefore, if you are able to catch hold of any field of knowledge and do a liberal inquiry into it, your thoughts get purified and you reach there also. So this is called a liberal education. We do not approach any worldly education also for the sake of what we can get out of that education, which is a servile attitude towards education. Servile attitude is, what can this education do to me? Will it give me some job? Or it is a utility oriented education. There we are actually demeaning the education. That means you are lowering the status, and what benefit you get out of education is very less. Rather, like Ekalavya, how he learnt archery just for the sake of archery, because he was just interested in archery. Like that, if you are able to get interested in any field of knowledge also and dedicatedly pursue it, automatically it helps your mind's cleanliness, as it were. So that is why it is given as a limb. It is not a direct way, but it helps you to cleanse. Like karma, it will help you. And obviously, Vedas themselves are the limbs. That means the Vedas are the highest scriptures which gives out the truth through the Karma Kanda, through the Upanishads, etc. So you have to catch hold of the scriptures, the Vedas, and rise above to understand what is in the head of the Vedas. Head of the Vedas, which is Upanishads. The essence of Upanishads is the self. So Vedas are the limbs. Tapaha, Damaha and Karma are its foundation, by which you attain the abode, which is the Satyam. That is the path that is given in this mantra. Tapa, Dama and Karma are its foundation. Vedas are all its limbs. Satyam, truth, is its abode. Yeah.
Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verse 27, the Lord says the similar thing of Yat Karosi Nadamati. At the end, he says, Mother Padam, means you offer it to me. Now, is there a difference between this interpretation and that interpretation? In the sense that here it is said, you do these things for upliftment. There it is saying that you offer all these things to me.
Yeah. So there actually in 9th chapter, that particular portion, the Lord actually comes down to very low to our level and offers the sadhana that anybody can do. In fact, one verse before that he says, Patram Pushpam Palam Toyam, he says, at least offer a fruit, offer a flower to me, etc. Then in the next verse says, even if you say, no, fruit is not available or leaf is not available, doesn't matter. Whatever you do, even before you eat, just think of me and eat, like that. Yat karoshi, yadashnasi, yat jughoshi, whatever you sacrifice, whatever you do it as oblation to me. So therefore, it is now we are at a position where we are doing laukika karmas, the karmas that we do in the world to earn money, take care of family, etc. Now, how to convert that into worship is the first stage. Therefore, it is applicable for all in that stage, and then you rise through all those things and then come to the stage of performing Nishkama Karma. So to connect that and this in the same frequency is probably not the right thing. Those type of actions at our level slowly lead us to the real Nishkama Karma, which is being discussed here.
In the beginning, sometimes Adhikari, there is specified that these are the qualifications for an Adhikari to learn this scripture. There are also the similar facts of Tapa, Samadama, and all these things are given. So, is that different from the what you just spoken in here?
Yeah, that is the adhikara that is given even in Tattva Bodha or Atma Bodha, etc., which are Prakarana Granthas, which are making us to get into the Upanishads finally. So here we see that Upanishads are talking to the highest level of students who are already prepared. And there also we see what is given in the first chapter and second chapter, etc., in differentiation. Therefore, this karma, it is given in the fourth chapter, probably covering all students, but who are all sitting in the Upanishad class. So therefore, the Adhikara Bheda between that and this is clearly there. For the Tattva Bodha and Atma Bodha like that, to the extent that we do tapas, see, if we even take that to the fullest extreme, then A fully prepared adhikari of the Tattvabodha or Atmabodha itself is like short of realization, that stage is. So that has to be taken as, to the extent that we do tapas, to that extent we are able to do that Shat Sampati or Mumukshatva, to that extent we will be able to grasp the content of Tattvabodha. That's how it has to be taken at the relative level. Yes.
You just said that the inner voice in a person who is sattvic is loud and clear.
Yes.
So keyword is sattvic. A sattvic person.
Correct.
Say a person like me who I think best rate myself as a Rajasic person with shades of Tamasic also obviously. So then obviously there are tussle always going on in our mind that I'm not definitely a Rajasic person. I'm definitely not a sattvic person. So is my inner conscious whatever is telling me, is it right? Or am I making myself hear what I want to hear? That tussle is always there.
Good question. The thing is, this voice of conscience has to be clearly understood as something which prompts by itself and that comes from the self within. Sometimes even in some movies also you hear this like something tells me and all, they say what their mind impulse says, they pass it off as though authority. That cannot be conscience. Your impulse cannot be conscience, obviously. Now, why the emphasis was given on sattvic person, or let us put it this way, a person in a sattvic state of mind. When you are in a very rajasic state of mind, when you are in anger, when you are extremely caught up in some emotions, that time you don't hear actually. Only when the mind calms down, it may say what you have done is wrong or it's okay or whatever it says. It comes after that. Therefore, even, and all of us do have sattva, and particularly we can say, irrespective of our predominant personality, only if some amount of sattva is there can we even sit in a class like this or take up even what is Bhagavad Gita, that type of a query. So therefore, we can without egoism appreciate the amount of sattva in us, and using that sattva whenever there is a dilemma. So because this dilemma comes to a person who wants to be dharmic, who is having a dilemma whether I must do this or not do this. See, a person who thinks that he can murder a person in broad daylight and he has no qualms about it, etc. We don't talk about conscience of such a terrorist or a subhuman person he is. Like a tiger doesn't have conscience when it kills. Obviously, it's its nature to kill and eat. And that is how it has been designed. It's computerized that way. So we don't talk about conscience in those cases. Where do we talk about it? When there is a dilemma. A person is asking for help in the signal. You are going to go, whether I should give him or not, because you are causing traffic jam. Otherwise, you must give it to him. But if you miss giving to him, something pokes you. So because you want to do dharma, which is the basic thought. How you do charity is a different thing, analysis, but the basic thought of giving is there. So therefore, that is why conscience is not taken as the first signal. It is taken as the last signal. If you have any confusion, it says you consult the Shastras, the Shruti, that is the Vedas itself, but Vedas are very difficult to approach directly, so therefore Rishis have given us Smriti, which is the interpretation. If Shruti is the law, Smriti is the interpretation of the law. Even Constitution has interpretation. If that is also not directly accessible by you, then it is, you go to the Rishis or the Gurus who can guide you, who you submit to and they can clear your doubt. If he is not available for the time being, then you think in our own past history of Itihasa and Puranas, in such similar situations, how other people who are dharmic in nature have acted or how they have been advised. If all this is not available for you to consult and still you have a dilemma, you consult your conscience. When Dushyanta saw Shakuntala in the forest, in the ashram, and he was attracted by the girl, he immediately did not jump into his impulse and did propose, or he did not do that. He immediately waited and thought, why does this type of impulse come to me? and then he thinks about various things, and then he goes ahead and does it, because he doesn't see anything contrary to his with his pure intentions, and then he goes and speaks to her. So this is where Kalidasa gives that chronology as to what has to be followed, and finally it is the conscience of the sattvic person. So at any decision making or in a dilemma, do not jump into conclusion, but pause for a while. The moment you are triggering your intellect or thought, that is good enough to tell you about your real work. But off the cuff, suddenly you go along the way, you feel like eating ice cream, something tells me I must eat today, and these are all not conscience. I'm just giving an extreme example to prove. So the impulse is different and conscience is different. Conscience is associated with sattvic state of mind. Mantra 9.
यो वा एतामेवं वेदापहत्य पाप्मानमनन्ते स्वर्गे लोके जेये प्रतितिष्ठति प्रतितिष्ठति यो वा एतामेवं वेदापहत्य पाप्मानमनन्ते स्वर्गे लोके जेये प्रतितिष्ठति प्रतितिष्ठति.
Indeed, he who thus knows this, having completely destroyed sin, is established in the boundless supreme realm of experience. He is established. Like in the 7th mantra, there is a repetition in the 9th mantra to show the actual conclusion. Pratitishtati, pratitishtati. There is probably no written works in those days, it was just oral. So to indicate that the Upanishad has finished, this is chanted twice. Even in the next Upanishad, Ishavasya Upanishad, mantra 17, there is a repetition. Of course, there's mantra 18 also, but 18th mantra is a prayer. So 17th mantra is the actual conclusion where he says a repetition. This is a style which we see more often occurring. So therefore it can be taken as a general rule. Indeed, he who thus knows, thus refers to what has been explained in the previous mantra. He who thus knows Brahman as its abode in Satyam, as having its limbs as Tapa, Dama and Karma, and whose limbs are Vedas. He who knows thus, having completely destroyed sin, is established in boundless supreme realm of experience. Here knows thus means it is just not the theoretical knowledge of the 8th verse. He who knows that in essence. He is who is able to then know this in practice. We will not quote this to say or prove something, we will say it out of our experience. So if somebody is asking what is Brahman, Brahman is where I am standing. If somebody says he is actually standing in Brahman, he is a self-realized master who is standing in Brahman. So therefore, the foundation, the abode, there what he is talking about from his experience has come through this, and he knows this. So one who knows this, having completely destroyed his sin. Sin here not just refers to the papa karma, it refers to the vasanas itself. From the higher standpoint, that's why when we classified karma into selfish, unselfish and selfless, unselfish is better vis-a-vis selfish. Selfish and unselfish are different in degrees. What is selfish for one person is unselfish for a lower person. Say for example, if a person is inspired to do something, a person who has never cared about even his family, let's say, he is a person who is concerned too much about his physical enjoyment and pleasures, drinks, and doesn't bother about his wife and children also. Suddenly somebody says or bout of some inspiration, he works for the family. It is a great act of unselfishness. From his standpoint, other person who is normally a family person who really works and sacrifices for the family, if he does that, he is just being a normal selfish person at his level. A person who is of a higher level, let us say a sannyasi, he suddenly thinks of his own family and does something only for that. He is very selfish at that point of time. So selfish and unselfish we see are nothing but higher and lower desires. That is what prompt selfish and unselfish actions. From the highest point of selfless, both are waste of time. If a person has to do hard work here but he wants to enjoy something in heaven, that is another type of enjoyment. So he is desiring something higher, but it is still in the realm of the world but at a different level, that's all. So a selfless person will see that also as a waste of time. So that is also sin. So here he says, having completely destroyed all sins, that is referring to the complete burning of all the vasanas. Sin here refers to the root cause of action, which is the vasanas. Anante swarge loke. Swarga loka is not the heaven that is being talked about here. Anante swarge. Ananta means infinite swarga. Infinite swarga is, however big this swarga is also finite. It is finite in space and in time. After some time you have to come back to earth. After all your you go to abroad, all your money is exhausted, you come back here and then start earning again. Like that, all your papa and punya, everything is exhausted. Punya is exhausted in swarga. You come back to earth again and start earning. But here he is not talking about that swarga. He is talking about anante swarge. That means it is talking about the realm of ultimate truth, ultimate heaven, ultimate realm of experience. He established in boundless supreme realm of experience. Jye pratitishthati. In that supreme realm he is established. He is established means there is no coming back. He is completely rooted there. He is established. He is established. So he is talking about the ultimate self-realization of that person. Indeed, he who thus knows this, having completely destroyed sin, is established in the boundless supreme realm of experience. He is established. So this concludes the Kenopanishad. Just as tradition, we will... Yes, sir.
So can you just explain why the word experience has been used? Because the entire process finally culminating into or getting to Brahman will come as an experience?
No, correct. It is the real thing is cannot be said in any words. It is beyond all experience actually. Experience is a coming together of subject, object, etc. So there is no subject-object relationship of experience in realization. So since he has used the swarge loke, loka is the realm of experience. So when you say he has gone to the feet of the Lord and merged, that is an experience. So there is no other word to convey. So swatma anubhava, you say it, again anubhava comes. So atma anubhava means you cannot really experience atman. You have become atman. Atma experiences itself. So these are the words that convey that inexplicable truth. That is why that word is given here.
Again, he is being said again to explain something which cannot be explained because he is over there. So
correct.
He is for the same purpose.
That means he who was the seeker before, the individual, that Jivatma has now completely merged with what is known as the Paramatma now. That is his experience.
Experience capital E.
Experience is capital E, correct. Yes.
In some place in Veda it is said that 1/4 part of the Brahman is this visible and 3/4 part is not. Here describing this Brahman as the two limbs of Veda and then what about the 3/4 part which is not the
No, that is completely a different context. There, in fact, 1/4 and 3/4 itself is not a measurement. It is for a very low grade of intellect who asks what portion of the whole when it is said that in the Uttama Purusha that it is only one aspect of me pervades the whole universe. That's what is going to be the starting point of next Upanishad. So one aspect is means what aspect is not manifest? Okay, 1/4, 3/4 is a number that is given. In fact, what is it? Like in Puranas, it is given as a huge Purusha in whose hair of the leg entire universe goes in and comes out. All these are figuratively given to give the expand of Brahman. So that is not the context in which it has to be compared here. Yes.
Sir, talking about experience, that is more related to bhakti or beyond knowledge, right, sir?
No, the experience that is given here is the state of self-realization. It is actually not an experience, it is beyond experience. Therefore, it is indicated as an experience with capital E, which cannot be said by any other word. So it is beyond bhakti, it is absolute knowledge it is.
We are talking about getting rid of the complete ego. Okay, and in that, then there is no duality, then there is no experience per se.
Correct.
So, when we talk about bhakti and jnana, the bhakta feels more associated or related to the one, the supreme. Again, I'm just clarifying. Is it possible to achieve that state without jnana, or jnana is a necessity for it?
No, actual self-realization is possible only by knowledge of the self. Bhakti, jnana, karma, all these are paths leading up to that. The actual waking up of a person from the sleep is knowledge of waking state. So what takes you away from the dream completely? When are you freed from all the experiences of the dream state? It is only when you know the waking state. That is called knowledge. So that knowledge is a completely different knowledge. It is not a jnana yoga. It is not a path of jnana. It is absolute knowledge that is being talked about. So every practice finally leads to this jnana only.
The self-realization is knowledge itself.
It is knowledge itself, pure knowledge. It is pure. We'll chant the first two invocations and then the first mantra, because Kenopanishad has two invocations here.
सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ आप्यायन्तु ममाङ्गानि वाक्प्राणश्चक्षुश्रोत्रमथो बलमिन्द्रियाणि च सर्वाणि सर्वं ब्रह्म उपनिषदं माहं ब्रह्म निराकुर्यां मा ब्रह्म निराकरोद निराकरणमस्त्वनिराकरणं मेस्तु तदात्मनि निरतेय उपनिषत्सु धर्मास्ते मयि सन्तु ते मयि सन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः केनेषितं पतति प्रेषितं मनः केन प्राणः प्रथमः प्रैतियुक्तः केनेषितां वाचमिमां वदन्ति चक्षुश्रोत्रं कौ देवो युनक्ति.
So this concludes Kenopanishad, one of the fascinating Upanishad which centers around the theme of consciousness, the real definition of God with reference to the Brahman within the personality, and that was beautifully explained by a story also. Traditionally, we said there are many Upanishads, 286 or so is given as number, 108 are considered orthodox Upanishads, and 10 are considered very sacred, and some people say 11 also. These 10 are commented by great acharyas, and if you take by the tradition that 10 Upanishads the first of which is Ishavasya Upanishad. Kenopanishad we took first because it is the order that Swamiji teaches us in the academy. There's no harm. There's no connection also. It can be done in any way. But if you go by the placement, it is not chronology or date or anything. We don't go by that in our tradition. But they have placed it in such a way that Ishavasya Upanishad is the first Upanishad. Ishavasya Upanishad comes in the, I think, Shukla Yajurveda, and very crisp and short Upanishad, but very profound and deep. The interpretation of the Vedas by various acharyas, particularly those who are Vishishta Advaita followers, Advaita followers, they question the mata of Shankaracharya, which is Advaita, which we follow here, on one basic thing, that this Dashopanishad, which is a main thing, you don't find the word Maya being used. Maya is the concept which thrashes any duality and finally puts Advaita principle in its strong hold. So their objection is Maya is not used in any of the Dashopanishad. Where do we see it in Gita? Mama Maya, Duratyaya, various places it comes, and maybe in one or other Upanishad it comes, which is quite a principal Upanishad also, but not in the 10 Upanishad. So some of the great Advaita Acharyas have given answer for that the word Maya doesn't come, but the concept of Maya is explained not in the Ishavasya Upanishad or the Dashopanishad, but the invocation of Ishavasya Upanishad. So the invocation of Ishavasya Upanishad itself is so powerful. Those who have studied Vedanta treatise will know that mantra is given there. So practice that mantra and come. We will chant before the class this particular mantra. We will conclude with the bhajans here.
पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदम् पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः